Queen Camilla's Garter parade ambush exposed. How Prince William and Princess Anne stopped her scheme. So Queen Camilla just tried to physically push Princess Catherine out of the live broadcast frame during the order of the Garter parade. And Princess Anne stopped an 800-person royal procession dead in its tracks to humiliate her in front of the entire world. And the immediate consequence was King Charles stripping his own wife of her ceremonial access and locking her out of the grand entrance at Windsor Castle. And honestly, this is so much bigger than an awkward family shove, because this was a calculated handwritten plot to erase Catherine from the history books that blew up on live television. Before we get into the receipts and that hidden footage, make sure you hit subscribe real quick so you do not miss what happens next. There is a lot more to this story. All right, let us start where the story actually begins. And here is the part that actually gets crazy. Picture the scene on the open square outside St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle on Garter Day. The weather is completely clear. Sunlight is reflecting off ancient stone walls, and thousands of spectators are packed along the traditional walk leading down the hill. We are talking about an 800-person procession wearing heavy blue velvet robes, white ostrich-plumed hats, and gold collars that weigh several pounds each, marching down the hill in perfect rhythmic alignment. This is a ceremony that has walked the exact same 200 yards of grass and stone every June for nearly 600 years, going all the way back to when King Edward III founded the Order of the Garter in 1348. It is broadcast live to over 50 countries with fixed camera positions placed on elevated platforms weeks in advance to capture every single step of the royal family. Everything looked completely normal for the first 4 minutes. Queen Camilla was walking beside King Charles with a comfortable, relaxed smile on her face, waving gently to the crowds lining the pathway. She looked at the elevated broadcast cameras on their platforms, completely confident that her private arrangement was locked in. But then, as the procession reached the widest part of the square right in front of St. George's Chapel, the exact spot where the crowd is thickest, and the primary camera lenses have their clearest, unhindered shot, Camilla made her move. She accelerated her pace sharply, coming through the marching line at a sudden, unnatural angle. She cut directly into the space between Prince William and Princess Catherine. Her heavy velvet robe caught Catherine's arm, throwing Catherine off balance and physically shoving her behind a massive stone pillar, completely blocking her from the main international television feed. For about a second and a half, the Princess of Wales disappeared entirely from a broadcast reaching millions of households across the globe. Catherine broke her stride to avoid tripping, recovered her footing within a single step with absolute composure, and kept her face completely still. Camilla glanced back over her shoulder with a sharp, victorious look that was caught by 2 professional photographers on the media riser. But Camilla's victory lasted less than 3 seconds. Before she could take another step forward, a single white-gloved hand shot straight up into the air at the front of the formation. Princess Anne stopped walking, raised her right hand high above her head, and held it there. The effect on 800 marching people was instantaneous and total. The mounted band cut their instruments mid-note. The long line of marchers compressed like an accordion and came to an abrupt grinding halt. The loud cheering from the crowd died away in a massive sweeping wave from the front of the square all the way to the back. A royal procession does not stop. That is the fundamental unwritten law of British state ceremonial. A procession stops for a royal death, and it stops for an active security threat. But in over 600 years of history, an 800-person procession has never stopped for an argument until that exact second. Anne stepped out of the formation, turned on her heel, and marched back down the line in full velvet robes. She walked past the rows of yeoman warders, past the international news cameras, past the foreign diplomats, standing on the chapel steps, and stopped directly in front of the Queen Consort. She looked dead into Camilla's eyes and issued a 4-word directive that echoed across the silent square: back to your place. Anne stood there in the middle of the courtyard and waited. She did not raise her voice, she did not grab Camilla's arm, and she did not repeat herself. She simply stood there with 6 centuries of royal authority behind her, and forced the Queen Consort to retreat in full view of the world. Camilla's face went completely pale. The confidence vanished. The colour drained from her cheeks, and she was forced to step backward, falling in at the very back of the line, behind lower-ranking nobles she had outranked for 2 decades. Prince William stepped forward, took Catherine's hand, and walked her proudly into her rightful position, while the thousands of spectators on the hill broke into loud, spontaneous applause. That was the most public humiliation handed to a Queen Consort in living memory. And it took 40 seconds. But to understand why Princess Anne had the absolute legal authority to halt that march, you have to go back 12 days to a closed rehearsal room inside Windsor Castle, where Camilla made a fatal miscalculation. Now here is what makes this even more significant. To understand why a disagreement over walking positions turned into an institutional disaster, You have to stop looking at the ceremonial robes and start looking at how royal television broadcasts are actually produced. We need to talk about St. George's Hall inside Windsor Castle. It is a vast historic room built under King Edward III and completely restored after the catastrophic fire of 1992. Its ceiling is lined with hundreds of individual coats of arms belonging to every Garter knight since the 14th century. 12 days before the public parade, St. George's Hall hosted a closed, highly restricted rehearsal for the event. There were no reporters, no public guests, and no general press cameras. The only cameras inside the room were technical broadcast units pointed at floor markings operated by a crew of 20 technicians, camera managers, and 2 representatives from the Lord Chamberlain's office holding official clipboard charts. The entire atmosphere inside that hall changed the moment Queen Camilla walked into the room. She did not go to her assigned tape mark on the floor. Instead, she walked straight over to the technical control area where the visual directors sat behind a massive bank of high-definition monitors. She stood behind the technicians and stared at the screens. And what was showing on those screens from 3 different camera angles was Princess Catherine. In royal television production, the cameras are programmed weeks in advance to follow specific individuals. Whenever Catherine moves, whether she turns her head, smiles at someone in the crowd, or makes a slight adjustment to her hat with 2 fingers, the camera automatically tracks her, because she is naturally the visual centre of every room she enters. It has been that way since 1953, when live television coverage of the monarchy was first pioneered during Queen Elizabeth II's coronation at Westminster Abbey. For 70 years, the palace has known that the camera lens is completely ruthless. It does not care about titles, it does not care about legal rank, and it does not care about who is wearing the largest crown. It focuses entirely on genuine human charisma. Camilla stood behind those monitors, watched Catherine effortlessly command every single camera frame and did the exact arithmetic she has been doing quietly for over 20 years. She realised that no matter how many titles King Charles gave her, no matter how wide her velvet robes were, and no matter how close she stood to the king, whenever both women appeared on screen together, the public's eye went straight to Catherine. Envy is an emotion, but what Camilla did next was a deliberate, calculated structural decision. She turned to her executive assistant, pointed at the monitor, showing the movement plan, and issued a direct order. She commanded that the Wales segment of the procession be split into 2 separate sections. Under her modified arrangement, Catherine was to be moved several paces backward, positioning her directly behind massive stone pillars in the hall, where the fixed camera rigs could not physically record her face. Let us be completely plain about what that mechanism actually does. A procession chart is not just a piece of paper telling people where to walk. It is a legal and technical document that dictates broadcast angles. Move a royal person 4 feet to the left or right on that paper, and while they are technically still present at the event, they are visually erased from the television broadcast. Camilla's strategy was to shrink Catherine's public visibility, claim the centre of the frame for herself and the king, and force global news networks to broadcast an image of the monarchy, where Catherine was reduced to a shoulder at the edge of the screen. It was a clever broadcast manoeuvre, but Camilla made a massive error in judgment, an error she has been making for 25 years. She completely ignored the man standing on his mark at the front of the room. Prince William was standing on his designated tape mark, and he heard every single word she said to the floor manager. But to truly understand why William reacted with such quiet, terrifying force in that rehearsal hall, you have to go back to the private history that the palace has spent nearly 30 years trying to sanitize. You have to go back to the 1980s and 90s, and to August 31st, 1997. Most people remember the public facts of that era. The 1992 marriage separation, the explosive 1995 panorama interview where Diana famously told the world that there were 3 people in her marriage, the 1996 divorce, and the tragic crash in Paris. What most people forget is the specific institutional machinery that William witnessed as a 15-year-old child living inside Kensington Palace. William was not an outside observer. He was a young boy watching his mother get systematically managed out of official visibility. He watched as palace courtiers slowly reorganized Diana's daily schedule, stripped her of her security details, removed her name from official event circulars, and gradually pushed her out of core royal spaces to make room for Camilla's public rehabilitation. When William heard Camilla order the technical crew to move Catherine behind a stone pillar, it triggered every single memory of what had been done to his mother 30 years earlier. He did not see a minor disagreement over camera angles. He saw the exact same institutional playbook being executed against his wife. William stepped off his mark on the floor, walked straight across St. George's Hall to the technical area, and the entire production crew stopped what they were doing. He did not raise his voice. He did not use formal titles, and he did not offer a polite diplomatic compromise. He pointed a finger straight at his stepmother's face in front of 11 household staffers and delivered a low, flat sentence that carried across the entire room. My wife stands next to me, and nobody puts her in the shadows. The silence in St. George's Hall was absolute. 2 senior technicians later admitted that they would remember that exact sentence for the rest of their lives. Camilla did not say a word in response. Her mouth went tight, her knuckles turned white as she gripped her gown, and she stared at William for 4 long seconds. In those 4 seconds, the convenient myth that they were a harmonious family, with minor disagreements, vanished completely. Camilla turned on her heel and walked out of the hall in total silence. That silence should have alarmed everyone in the building. Camilla is not someone who gives up on a plan when she loses an argument publicly. She retreats quietly, reorganizes her strategy, and works behind closed doors. For 12 days leading up to Garter Day, Camilla did not say another word to William about the procession order. Everyone around the king assumed she had accepted William's ultimatum. They were completely wrong. She was using those 12 days to prepare a quiet counterstrike that she believed was completely undetectable. And this is the detail that stopped me cold when I first read about it, because it shows you how far Camilla was willing to go to secure a visual victory. You have to look at the exact scheme she constructed in total secrecy late the night before Garter Day, deep inside her private apartments at Windsor Castle. Long after the official household staff had been dismissed for the evening, Camilla sat at her dressing table. On the table, amidst her cosmetics and jewellery boxes, she laid out a sheet of thick ceremonial parchment. Using a pen, she hand-drew an altered version of the official procession chart. She created a wide gap directly between Prince William and Princess Catherine, a gap wide enough for a single person wearing heavy velvet robes, and drew an arrow inserting herself straight into that gap. Think about what that single handwritten line represented. By inserting herself directly between the Prince and Princess of Wales. During a live broadcast, she guaranteed that every single photograph taken by international news outlets the following morning would show 3 figures, the king herself and William, while Catherine would be pushed off the edge of the camera frame, hidden behind a sea of moving velvet fabric. It was a complete visual erasure of the future queen consort. Early the next morning, at approximately 7:15, Camilla called her executive assistant into her dressing room and locked the heavy oak door. She placed the handwritten parchment in front of him and issued a single uncompromising command before the parade leaves the castle. Swap this page into the Lord, Great Chamberlain's official leather binder. The assistant was terrified. He knew exactly what he was being asked to do. The Lord, Great Chamberlain's binder is the official legal running order of a state ceremony. Swapping a page in that binder without the authorization of the king or the household managers is a severe breach of royal protocol, a career-ending move that would result in immediate dismissal. He attempted to raise an objection, but Camilla stepped forward, stood inches from him, and used the 2 levers that always work in palace hierarchy: his job security and his continued access to high-level royal appointments. She told him he had one job and one job only, and that was to get the paper into the binder before 8 o'clock. The assistant rolled the parchment, slipped it inside his coat pocket, and crossed the castle corridors to the ceremonial operations room. This is the room where the official master folders sit on a heavy oak table under guard until they are handed to the heralds who direct the parade. The assistant stood in the hallway and waited for the exact 40-second window, when the doorway guard was relieved by the morning shift. When the guard change occurred and the doorway belonged to no one, the assistant slipped inside. His hands were shaking so violently that it took him 2 attempts to open the metal clip on the leather binder. He pulled out the legitimate signed procession chart inserted Camilla's handwritten forgery, and snapped the metal clip shut. The entire operation took less than 30 seconds. Camilla was informed within minutes that the swap was complete. She looked at herself in her dressing room mirror, adjusted her diamond earrings and smiled. She believed the folder was secure. She believed the parade heralds would follow her page, and she believed Catherine would spend the afternoon hidden behind a stone pillar. She had no idea that every single second of the forgery had been captured on high-definition video. Okay, so here is the part that actually changes everything. This is where the story shifts from a quiet internal plot into an active high-level counter-surveillance operation executed by Prince William. What Camilla never understood about William is that he does not react impulsively to threats. He prepares for them with absolute thoroughness. When Camilla walked out of St. George's Hall 12 days earlier, without arguing, William knew instantly that she was planning a workaround. He knew the palace PR machine, he knew how documents move through private secretaries, and he knew that a quiet Camilla is a working Camilla. The night before, Garter Day, William personally instructed 2 trusted technical officers to install a discreet high-resolution surveillance unit inside the ceremonial operations room. This was not a bulky camera on a tripod. It was a tiny, state-of-the-art lens concealed inside an antique bronze clock, sitting on a side table, an antique that had belonged to Queen Mary and had remained in that exact room for nearly a century. The camera recorded continuously streaming a live encrypted feed directly to a secure tablet computer in William's possession. When Camilla's executive assistant walked into the operations room during the guard change, unclipped the leather binder and swapped the official pages, William was sitting in his private study, watching the entire event happen in real time on his tablet screen. I watched the assistant glance nervously at the open door. He watched his hands shake as he opened the binder. He watched him pull out the legitimate chart and insert the handwritten page. And crucially, when the assistant held the forged parchment flat on the table for 2 seconds before closing the folder, the high-definition camera captured a crystal-clear image of the paper, including Camilla's distinct, unmistakable handwriting and the drawn arrow. William saved the digital video file to 2 separate secure servers. He did not raise an alarm, he did not call a security detail, and he did not engage in an argument with Camilla's office. He walked into the adjacent dressing room, where Catherine was finalising her ceremonial attire, put his arms around her and told her to walk her assigned line with complete confidence and let him handle the rest. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, 90 minutes before the parade was scheduled to step off, William walked straight into King Charles's private dressing suite. King Charles was standing in front of a mirror, while 2 senior valets were carefully adjusting the heavy blue velvet fall of his garter robes, a delicate process that takes nearly 40 minutes. William did not knock formally, and he did not use polite court greeting formulas. He walked across the room, placed his tablet computer flat on the king's desk, and pressed the play button. King Charles stood in half his ceremonial robes and watched the video playback in total silence. He watched a household assistant enter his private operations room, open the official binder, and replace a state document with a handwritten forgery drawn by his own wife. This is where King Charles was forced to make a devastating choice, and what he did next changed the institutional dynamic of the monarchy forever. For 30 years, Charles had defended Camilla against public criticism, against media attacks, and against the deep skepticism of his own family. He had insisted on her inclusion in official events. He had fought to grant her royal titles, and he had placed her next to him on the throne. But watching that video feed, Charles realised with absolute clarity that this was not a minor family disagreement. This was a direct illegal manipulation of a state document inside his own castle, designed to publicly sabotage the heir to the throne and his wife on live international television. Charles understood that if Camilla's forged chart was allowed to govern the parade, the resulting television images, showing the Queen Consort physically isolating the Prince and Princess of Wales, would create a catastrophic public scandal that would permanently damage the credibility of his reign. The king dismissed his valets immediately, locking the dressing room doors. Witnesses outside reported that Charles did not scream or raise his voice. Instead, his face went pale, then flushed, deep red, with profound institutional anger. He walked over to an antique oak desk in the corner of the room, pulled out a sheet of heavy ceremonial parchment, a stick of dark red beeswax, and a brass candle holder. Using a fountain pen, Charles handwrote a binding executive royal decree. He explicitly mandated that Prince William and Princess Catherine were to walk together side by side for the entire duration of the Garter procession, without exception. Then he added a decisive, uncompromising clause. He officially authorized the ceremonial officer holding the decree to physically intervene and remove any individual who attempted to alter the procession line, regardless of their rank, title, or royal status. Regardless of title. 4 words written by a king about his own wife. Charles held the stick of red wax over the candle flame until it melted, dripped a large circle of molten wax onto the bottom of the parchment, and pressed his personal royal signet ring deep into the wax, leaving the raised impression of the crown. In royal legal history, a wax-sealed executive decree is not a request or a guideline. It is an absolute binding military order that obliges any serving officer to execute it instantly, bypassing all standard chain of command checks. At 9:15, Charles called his sister, Princess Anne, into his dressing room. He handed her the sealed parchment in her official capacity as Gold Stick in Waiting, one of the oldest military and ceremonial offices in the United Kingdom, dating back to the 15th century under the Tudor monarchs. The Gold Stick is personally responsible for the physical safety and protection of the sovereign during state ceremonies. Charles looked at Princess Anne and gave her a direct instruction. Enforce this order on the square without regard for who violates it. Anne read the parchment, once folded it carefully. placed it inside the inner pocket of her uniform jacket, and walked down to the courtyard. The trap was locked, sealed, and walking down the corridor in a jacket pocket. And Camilla had no idea it existed. We now return to the open square outside St. George's Chapel. At the exact moment when Camilla executed her ambush, when Camilla accelerated her pace, cut across the line, and shoved her heavy velvet robes against Catherine's shoulder, she believed with total certainty that her handwritten chart was governing the parade. She believed the broadcast cameras were recording her victory. She had no idea that at 7 o'clock that morning, the parade heralds had been quietly handed Charles's sealed executive decree overriding her forgery. When Princess Anne raised her white-gloved hand into the air and brought the 800-person procession to a dead halt, the silence on the square was absolute. Anne stepped out of the formation and walked down the stone pathway. Her boots echoed sharply against the cobblestones. She walked past the rows of yeoman warders, past the international media platforms, and stopped directly in front of Camilla. She looked at the Queen Consort and delivered those 4 words, "Back to your place." Camilla stood frozen. She looked at Anne, then looked past her at the parade marshals, standing motionless with their batons, and realised in a single terrifying second that her scheme had completely failed. The official binder had not saved her. The staff had not obeyed her chart. She was standing in front of thousands of spectators and dozens of international camera lenses, completely exposed. Anne did not gesture, she did not raise her voice, and she did not offer Camilla an elegant way out. She simply stood like an iron wall and waited. Camilla turned her head, bowed, and retreated to the very back of the procession line, taking a position behind junior peers and royals. She had outranked for 20 years. Prince William stepped forward, placed his hand reassuringly on Catherine's arm, and guided her back into the centre of the walkway. The thousands of onlookers lined along the hill, realising exactly what had just transpired, erupted into a massive wave of applause specifically for William and Catherine. The procession resumed its march down the hill towards St. George's Chapel, but as the heavy oak doors of the chapel closed behind the royal family, separating them from the public and the cameras, the true emotional explosion was about to occur inside the private stone apartments. The private reception room behind St. George's Chapel is a historic vaulted stone chamber with thick oak doors, narrow stained glass windows, and heavy furniture. The moment those oak doors clicked shut, completely cutting off the sound of the crowd outside, Queen Camilla turned around and unleashed her stored fury. She went directly at King Charles, her voice loud and trembling with rage. She accused him of allowing Princess Anne to publicly humiliate her in front of global television networks. She demanded to know how he could allow his wife, the Queen Consort, to be demoted to the back of a procession for the sake of his daughter-in-law. She claimed her royal authority had been permanently destroyed. King Charles stood silently by the long wooden table, refusing to answer her. Then Princess Catherine did something she had never done in 14 years of public royal life. Catherine is known throughout the household as the ultimate mediator, the person who remains calm, de-escalates family tension, and avoids confrontation at all costs. But Catherine stepped directly into the centre of the room, looked Camilla straight in the eye, and spoke with absolute clarity. "Nobody caused this, but you. You walked into my line on purpose in front of the cameras, and everything that happened on that square was your own doing." Camilla let out a harsh laugh, turned to Charles, and claimed that the ceremonial chart in the binder had specified that walking order. She demanded that anyone accusing her of changing the documents produce concrete evidence right there in that room. She believed her assistant had destroyed her handwritten sheet hours earlier. She stood in that stone room in her full velvet robes, completely convinced that no proof existed. That was when Princess Anne walked across the room to Catherine's side. Anne looked at Catherine and spoke quietly, but her words were heard by everyone in the room. She told Catherine that her late mother-in-law, Princess Diana, used to endure the exact same institutional cruelty during the 1980s and 90s. She reminded Catherine that whenever courtiers or family members tried to push Diana into the shadows, Diana would absorb the insult, hold her head high, keep her face completely still, and finish the walk, even though it cost her a piece of her soul every single time she did it. Hearing Diana's name spoken, with such raw, unvarnished honesty by the one woman who had witnessed the entire tragedy unfolded, something deep inside Catherine, the emotional exhaustion of the past weeks, the physical shove on the square and the profound weight of carrying Diana's legacy, suddenly caught up with her. Catherine stood tall, kept her chin up, but tears began streaming silently down her face. William saw his wife's tears, and his expression turned to absolute stone. He walked slowly over to the central oak table. Prince William stood at the table in total silence. He reached inside his ceremonial coat pocket and pulled out 2 distinct items, laying them flat on the wood for everyone to see. The first item was his tablet computer. He turned the screen toward Camilla and pressed play. The room watched the high-definition video of her executive assistant entering the operations room, opening the binder and swapping the official pages. The second item William placed on the table was the actual handwritten sheet of parchment. Camilla's ink, her distinct handwriting, and the drawn arrow inserting herself into the line. William's security detail had entered the operations room within 10 minutes of the procession's departure, recovered the forged chart from the assistant's desk and handed it directly to William. It had been sitting in William's coat pocket during the entire walk down the hill. Camilla stared at the handwritten sheet, and her entire posture collapsed. She took an involuntary step backward, reaching out to catch the arm of a heavy wooden chair to keep herself upright. No one in the room moved to assist her. King Charles stepped forward and placed a third document on the table, directly beside her forgery. His wax-sealed executive decree bearing the red crown impression. Charles looked at his wife and spoke in a low, exhausted voice. He asked her if she truly believed he was blind. He informed her that he had signed the order the previous night, after William showed him the surveillance footage. He told her that she had used a lie to move against his family, and that the truth was now going to handle the consequences. The confrontation was over. Within 24 hours, King Charles signed a series of binding administrative directives. He permanently stripped Camilla of her ceremonial oversight privileges. He ordered the immediate retrieval of her golden master key to the grand entrance at Windsor Castle, a key she had coveted for years as a symbol of her status. Palace staff fitted a heavy iron security chain across the grand entrance doors in broad daylight, sending an undeniable signal through the entire household. Charles issued a formal legal letter confirming Princess Catherine's permanent, unalterable precedence at all future state and ceremonial occasions. Furthermore, Camilla's official public schedule was quietly cut back, removing her from joint appearances with William and Catherine. As for the executive assistant who executed the document swap, he was summarily dismissed from royal service that same afternoon, his security clearances permanently revoked. He became the latest casualty of a scheme he had been coerced into executing. When you step back and examine the entire chain of events that unfolded on Garter Day at Windsor Castle, you realise that this was never simply about an awkward shove or a disagreement over television camera angles. This was a profound 30-year generational reckoning. For nearly 3 decades, Queen Camilla operated under the assumption that proximity to King Charles granted her total permanent authority over the image of the British monarchy. She spent 20 years executing careful public relations manoeuvres, accumulating patronages, and slowly stepping into spaces that once belonged to Princess Diana. She believed that by wearing the crowns, holding the titles, and controlling the ceremonial charts, she could gradually rewrite history and position herself as the undisputed matriarch of the crown. She completely miscalculated the boy who walked behind Princess Diana's coffin in September 1997. Prince William is no longer a vulnerable 15-year-old child, forced to endure institutional decisions made by palace courtiers. He is the Duke of Cornwall, controlling a £1.2 billion empire, possessing complete financial independence and holding ultimate authority over the future of the monarchy. He spent years observing the exact tactics used to isolate his mother, and he swore a quiet, unyielding oath that those same tactics would never ever be used against his wife. When Camilla attempted to use a forged procession chart to push Catherine into the shadows, William did not engage in public drama or media briefing wars. He used precision surveillance, legal royal mechanisms, and absolute institutional leverage to dismantle her scheme before she even stepped onto the grass. He enfolded Princess Anne, the living embodiment of Queen Elizabeth II's unflinching duty to enforce the law on live international television. The power dynamic within the House of Windsor has permanently shifted. Queen Camilla still holds her title, but her actual institutional influence has been completely hollowed out. She sits in private residences, knowing that her access exists purely at the tolerance of a king, who is wary, and a stepson who will one day inherit every castle, every estate, and every crown. Princess Catherine holds the absolute trust of the nation, the total protection of her husband, and the explicit legal backing of the king. The future of the British monarchy has been secured not through corporate public relations spin or manufactured media narratives, but through the quiet, immovable resolve of a son who remembered everything he witnessed as a child and made sure the history books were written correctly. She lost her entire power base in 40 seconds on a square at Windsor, in front of the exact same cameras. She spent 30 years trying to master all, because she could not bear to share one photograph with a younger woman who never once asked to stand in front of her.